So picture this. It is September 1939, and the deadliest, just the most destructive war in human history has just broken out in Europe.
Right, World War II.
Exactly. The human tragedy that was about to unfold was, I mean, it was unimaginable. The whole globe is basically standing on the edge of an absolute abyss.
A completely terrifying moment in history.
Yeah. So what do you think the United States stock market did in response to this catastrophic news? I mean, did it plummet? Did investors just, panic and hoard all their cash?
You would definitely think so.
Right. But no, it didn't. The market jumped. It actually surged almost 10% in a single day.
Wow.
Yeah. And, why? Because the economy doesn't run on math, it doesn't run on empathy, and it certainly doesn't run on pure objective logic. It runs on stories.
And that single historical anomaly completely breaks the foundational assumption of modern finance.
Oh, totally.
Because we have this deep-seated desire to believe that the economy is like a highly calibrated machine.
Right. Like everyone is behaving rationally.
Exactly. We want to believe that millions of perfectly rational actors are just sitting at their kitchen tables or, in their Wall Street offices, calmly calculating their expected utility.
Running the data points.
Right, running the data and making perfectly logical choices with their money. But when you actually look at the historical record, that machine completely falls apart.
It really does. Well, welcome to the deep dive. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Yes, glad you're joining us.
Our mission for this deep dive is to uncover the hidden engine behind major economic events. Because it turns out the true drivers of booms, busts, recessions, and bubbles are the stories we tell each other.
The viral story.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking at a massive stack of source material today, primarily focusing on this incredible book, Narrative Economics: How Stories Go Viral and Drive Major Economic Events by the Nobel laureate Robert J. Shiller.
And we're also including his updated reflections from 2020.
Yes, which are super relevant right now.
They really are. And the core premise here is a radical, almost uncomfortable departure from how traditional economists view the world.
Because traditional models rely so heavily on spreadsheets.
Exactly. They look at interest rates.
Gross domestic product.
Yeah, supply chain logistics, all that hard data. But the source material reveals that to truly understand why a market crashes or why a specific asset suddenly skyrockets in value, you don't need a spreadsheet.
You need something else entirely.
Right. You need to look at viral narratives. You have to understand that stories spread through human populations exactly like biological diseases.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to examine exactly why certain economic stories stick in our minds, how they literally, physically manipulate our brain chemistry, and what you can learn from them to protect your own financial decisions.
Which is so crucial.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because once you see how these stories operate, you realize you are just swimming in them every single day. I mean, think about your own life. Think about the last time you decided not to buy something because of like a vague rumor you heard or just a headline you skimmed.
Right? You were participating in this exact phenomenon.
Yeah, without even realizing it.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at the exact same mathematical curves that dictate public health.
Wait, really? Like actual epidemiology?
Yes, exactly. When epidemiologists track a disease, whether it's the 1918 influenza pandemic or the Ebola outbreak in Liberia or, COVID-19, they map out a contagion curve.
Okay.
There's this period where the rate of infection drastically exceeds the rate of recovery,
Right.
so the virus just explodes exponentially.
We get the huge spike.
And then eventually the curve peaks. The recovery rate outpaces the contagion, and the disease sort of fades back into the background. What Shiller's work demonstrates is that an epidemic of an idea, an economic narrative, operates on that exact same mathematical trajectory.
Wow. So we have contagion and we have recovery. But in the world of stories, recovery just means forgetting, right? Like the story just loses its novelty.
Precisely. We just get bored of it. And what we are exploring today is how everything from the price of a cryptocurrency to global macroeconomic tax policy is driven by the exact same human impulses that make you love a good mystery novel.
Or lean in to hear a juicy piece of gossip at a dinner party.
Exactly. The virus isn't a microbe, it's a narrative. And the vector of transmission is just human conversation.
It's wild to think about.
It really is.
Let's jump right into perhaps the most famous or, infamous economic narrative of our modern era,
Bitcoin.
Oh, this is a great example.
The sources examined Bitcoin not as some unprecedented mathematical marvel, but as basically the ultimate masterclass in storytelling. Now, to be fair, the underlying tech is incredibly complex.
Extremely
The
complex.
source material mentions things like the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, and I mean, if you ask 1,000 people in the street to explain how that cryptography actually works, maybe one could do it. Maybe.
Exactly. But the narrative that made Bitcoin go massively viral didn't rely on the math. The math is boring to most people. The narrative relied on specific, brilliantly timed, highly emotional story pillars.
Yeah, the foundation of the Bitcoin narrative is just pure human interest, and it actually starts with a classic detective story.
Oh, the mystery creator.
Right. The concept was introduced in a 2008 white paper by someone, or, some group, calling themselves Satoshi Nakamoto.
Right.
And to this day, the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto remains unknown.
Which is crazy when you think about how big it is.
It is. But that is not a bug in the system. It is a massive feature. It's a built-in mystery. Human brains are intrinsically wired to solve puzzles. We simply cannot stand an open loop.
Yeah, it's exactly why true crime podcasts are so ridiculously popular. We want to know who did it.
Precisely. And every time a journalist claims to have tracked down the real Satoshi Nakamoto, the story flares up again. The narrative is reignited.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because if Bitcoin had been invented by just a known tech CEO with a standard corporate background, the story would have been processed, categorized, largely forgotten by the mainstream media.
Right, a known entity has a very fast forgetting rate.
Exactly. But a mystery acts as a powerful contagion multiplier. It literally keeps the story alive in the news cycle for decades.
And the story goes so much deeper than just a whodunit mystery, doesn't it? The Bitcoin narrative taps into a very specific, deeply rooted sentiment, which is anarchism.
Yes, the anti-establishment angle.
The sources actually trace this philosophical thread all the way back to Pierre-Joseph Proudhon in 1840. Proudhon defined being governed as being watched, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, regulated, enrolled.
Indoctrinated, preached at.
Yeah, controlled, checked, estimated, valued, censured, commanded. I mean, it is a suffocating list.
Very suffocating.
And that feeling of suffocation is exactly what Bitcoin promised to cure. It offered this technological escape hatch from that exact surveillance.
And we really have to firmly contextualize the era in which this narrative was born. Because Bitcoin launched right on the heels of the 2008 global financial crisis.
Right.
You had this immense, palpable anxiety about the stability of the traditional financial system. People were watching legacy banks just completely collapse or get bailed out.
Yeah, the trust was totally broken.
And shortly after that, in 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement emerged. Now, just to be absolutely clear to you listening, we are impartially reporting on these political movements and sentiments strictly as historical drivers of this narrative.
Right. We aren't taking a side on their validity. We're just looking to history.
Exactly. But historically speaking, Occupy Wall Street was fundamentally a protest against perceived economic inequality and a total loss of faith in centralized financial institutions.
Right. There was just this profound feeling in the air that the game was rigged, that fiat currency and central banks were controlled by an elite few who were completely insulated from the consequences of their actions, while the average person, paid the price.
And into that highly combustible emotional environment, the Bitcoin narrative drops like a match.
Boom.
Yeah, it wasn't just a new kind of money, it was a narrative of individual empowerment. It promised a currency that was theoretically anonymous, mathematically verified, and entirely immune to the meddling of governments and central banks.
It essentially weaponized the anxiety of 2008 and offered a solution wrapped in an anarchist flag.
Beautifully put, yes.
And there's another layer to this, which I think is fascinating, which is the membership token aspect. Buying Bitcoin, especially in the early days, wasn't just an investment. It was buying your way into a cosmopolitan, tech-savvy elite.
You were joining the club.
Right. You weren't just holding a digital asset. You were holding a piece of the future. You were part of this exclusive group that got it, while the rest of the world was still relying on outdated paper money.
But what I find truly fascinating and, well, maybe a bit dark, is how the sources connect this cryptocurrency to a very specific modern Luddite fear.
Ooh, yes. The fear of labor-saving machinery replacing human jobs.
Exactly. This is an anxiety that dates back to the Industrial Revolution, to the original Luddites literally smashing textile looms.
Right, the weavers.
Yeah. But it has mutated beautifully for the 21st century. Today, the fear is centered on artificial intelligence and automation.
I mean, people look at everyday tools like Amazon's Alexa, or they see the looming prospect of driverless cars and automated trucking, and they feel this profound existential dread.
It's not just the fear of getting fired, it's the fear of human labor becoming entirely obsolete.
Yeah, waking up one day and realizing society simply doesn't need your skills anymore, that's terrifying.
It really is. And in this environment of deep technological anxiety, Bitcoin functions as a psychological life raft.
A life raft, how so?
Well, let's look at the emotional utility of it. Very few people feel secure that they will personally be on the winning end of the AI and automation revolution.
Fair point.
But Bitcoin sits directly at the intersection of finance and cutting-edge computer science. By experimenting with it, by buying even a tiny fraction of a coin, people gain a profound sense of narrative comfort.
Oh, I see.
It makes them feel like they are aligning themselves with the winning side. They are participating in the computer revolution rather than just being crushed by it.
Okay, but hold on. Because this is where the whole thing starts to look like an emperor has no clothes situation to me.
How do you mean?
Because almost no one actually understands how this works under the hood.
Yeah.
I would challenge most people who own cryptocurrency to explain a Merkle tree or the specific mechanics of a decentralized public ledger. They can't do it.
No, the vast majority definitely cannot.
Right. It feels like buying a ticket to a 4-hour black and white avant-garde film just so you can tell your friends you saw it, even if you slept through the entire thing.
That's a great analogy.
So I have to ask,
Yeah.
if the actual underlying technology doesn't matter to the average buyer, does that mean the value of this massive economic asset is literally just the value of its fandom?
Well, what you are pointing to is the core friction between classical economics and narrative economics.
Okay.
And yes, the source material argues that the value is almost entirely narrative. Legendary investor Warren Buffett famously called it a gambling device, noting it produces nothing.
Right. It doesn't build cars or grow food.
Exactly. The value of Bitcoin, much like the value of gold throughout the vast majority of human history, exists primarily because people perceive that other people value it.
It's a collective belief.
It is driven by public excitement. It is driven by the contagion of the story. You do not need to understand the cryptography to want to be part of the future or to want an escape hatch from the banking system. The narrative itself generates the value, independent of the math.
So an asset with zero intrinsic physical value becomes worth roughly $1 trillion entirely through the power of a mystery and a feeling of rebellion.
Basically, yes.
But surely that only works for something completely novel, like a digital currency. I mean, it couldn't possibly apply to the rigid bureaucratic world of government policy, could it? If Bitcoin proves that complex cryptography needs a human interest story to go viral, how do economists sell incredibly boring, dry concepts like, tax policy?
Well, you would think government policy is immune to this, but the mechanism of narrative contagion doesn't care if the subject is a rebellious cryptocurrency or the most mind-numbing taxation theory imaginable.
Really? It works in taxes too.
Oh, absolutely. It only cares about the visual anchor. And when we talk about dry economic policy, it truly does not get much drier than taxation theory.
Yeah, nobody wants to read about that.
Right. Yet one of the most famous economic narratives of the late 20th century was the Laffer curve.
Okay, let's lay out what the Laffer curve actually is for a moment, just to prove how boring it should be.
Go for it.
So it is a foundational concept of supply-side economics. It's basically an inverted U-shaped graph showing the theoretical relationship between tax rates and tax revenue.
Which sounds thrilling already.
Oh, I know. But the core idea is simple logic. If a government taxes its citizens at 0%, it collects zero revenue. If it taxes its citizens at 100%, nobody is going to work, because why would you? So the government also collects zero revenue.
Makes perfect sense.
Therefore, there must be a mathematical point in the middle that maximizes revenue. And the argument was that if you are currently taxing past that optimal point, lowering taxes could theoretically stimulate so much economic growth that government revenue would actually increase.
Now, on its own, that is just a textbook paragraph.
Totally.
It is something a college sophomore highlights in a macroeconomics book and immediately forgets after the midterm. It has an incredibly high forgetting rate.
Because it's just an abstract concept.
Exactly. But the story of the Laffer curve went massively viral. It dictated trillions of dollars in fiscal policy. And the reason it went viral is because of a remarkably vivid, specific story attached to it.
Okay, so what was the story?
The narrative goes that in 1974, the economist Art Laffer was having dinner at the Two Continents restaurant in Washington, D.C.
Okay, an upscale elite setting.
Very upscale. He was dining with some heavy hitters of the era, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld.
Oh, wow. Big names.
Yeah, and to explain his theory to these powerful politicians, Laffer supposedly grabbed a cloth napkin off the restaurant table, pulled out a pen, and drew the U-curve right there in ink.
It is such an incredibly punchy cinematic scene.
Isn't it?
It has everything. You have the brilliant academic having a sudden epiphany. You have the high-powered Washington insiders in a smoky elite restaurant. You have the desperate, impromptu sketching on a napkin to show the politicians the light.
Exactly. The story was actually published a few years later in a 1978 book by a journalist named Jude Wanniski, who was supposedly also at that dinner.
So he wrote it down and popularized it.
Yes, it was a brilliant piece of storytelling that took a dry economic theory and turned it into a movie scene.
But the reality of that narrative is where we see the true power of a viral story, right?
Wow. Oh, definitely. Because Art Laffer himself disowned the napkin story.
He did.
Yes. He publicly stated that he used to frequent nice restaurants, and he absolutely would never have ruined a fine cloth napkin with a pen.
That's hilarious. So he debunked his own foundational myth.
He did. It didn't happen the way the story claimed. Yet, the narrative was so powerful, so sticky, that the National Museum of American History actually exhibits a cloth napkin with the curve on it.
Wait, really?
Yes, it was found in Jude Wanniski's papers after his death.
Wait, so the museum is literally displaying a prop?
Essentially, yes. A piece of physical theater that supports the narrative. And this is a crucial point in understanding narrative economics.
Why did the story survive and thrive even after the creator of the theory debunked the visual myth?
It is because visual details dramatically lower the forgetting rate of a narrative. The source material references the ancient Roman scholar Simonides.
Oh, the memory palace guy.
Exactly. Simonides observed that human memories are strongest when they are attached to vivid, highly specific, and sometimes completely bizarre visual imagery. This is the foundation of the memory palace technique.
The sources actually compare this to the modern memory expert Harry Lorraine.
Oh, his key trick.
Yes. His trick for remembering where you put your keys isn't to just verbally repeat to yourself, I put them in the flower pot, I put them in the flower pot.
Because you'll forget.
Right. He says that doesn't work. Your brain will forget the words. He says you have to vividly picture a gigantic, absurd, glowing key growing out of a flower pot like a plant. Your brain latches on to the weird, specific visual.
And the human brain is biologically wired to process and retain visual information far more effectively than abstract concepts.
That makes total evolutionary sense.
We evolved to remember the location of a specific fruit tree by a uniquely shaped rock, not by memorizing, like, GPS coordinates. The napkin provided that visual anchor for an abstract tax theory.
And we see this exact same phenomenon with other viral artifacts mentioned in the sources. I mean, think of the Lacoste clothing brand.
Right, the little crocodile.
Yeah. Jean-René Lacoste was a famous tennis player in the 1920s. His nickname on the court was the Crocodile. So he put a little embroidered crocodile logo on his shirts.
And it caught on.
It became this iconic, viral brand symbol that persists as a multi-million-dollar asset today, long after everyone has completely forgotten his actual tennis career.
Yeah.
The visual outlived the reality.
Or the rollerboard suitcase. This is one of my favorite examples from the source.
Oh, the luggage with the wheels.
Yeah. The sources mention a man named Bernard Sadow who actually invented a wheeled suitcase way back in 1972.
But it was terrible, right?
It really was. His design was just a strap you pulled, and the suitcase would constantly flop over. It completely failed to catch on. People literally laughed at him in airports.
Ouch.
But then, in the 1990s, an airline pilot named Robert Plath invented the modern rollerboard with the rigid, retractable handle.
Okay, so it was a better design.
Now, it was a better design, yes. But it didn't just go viral because of the engineering. It went viral because they advertised it with visual imagery of glamorous flight crews striding effortlessly through airports.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The visual narrative changed overnight from clunky flop to sleek, elite traveler. The physical object required a glamorous narrative to achieve contagion. The visual of the flight crew provided the necessary social proof and aspiration.
See, here's where it gets really interesting to me. I look at the Laffer napkin, and it feels like a movie prop. I look at the glamorous flight crews, but I have to push back on this premise just a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Laffer curve didn't cause a massive tax revolt purely because it's a cool story about a napkin. I mean, the late 1970s had massive stagflation. People were hurting financially. Inflation was
Well,
eating away at their
this
savings.
is very true.
Isn't it a disservice to say a story drove this massive shift in global tax policy when the underlying economic reality of the 1970s was already primed for a revolt? We can't reduce macroeconomic shifts to, like, cinematic lighting.
That is a highly important distinction. You are absolutely right that the narrative did not create the economic pain. Stagflation was real.
Right.
But the pain alone does not dictate the policy response. The Laffer napkin story provided the incredibly sticky solution to that pain.
Ah, the solution.
Furthermore, the source material emphasizes that narratives rarely act in a vacuum. The Laffer curve succeeded because it was part of what the sources call a narrative constellation.
A constellation, like a group of stories.
Exactly. It rode a wave of other highly related viral stories. The environment was rich with tax revolt narratives.
Oh, right, like the Pomperipossa effect.
Yes, the Astrid Lindgren story.
The sources talk about the famous Swedish children's author, Astrid Lindgren. In 1976, she realized her marginal tax rate in Sweden had actually climbed over 100%.
Which is just mathematically insane.
She was literally losing money by working. So instead of writing a dry op-ed complaining about it, she wrote a satirical viral fairy tale about a character named Pomperipossa living in this bizarre, oppressive world of taxation.
And it became a massive international story.
And simultaneously, in the United States, you had Proposition 13 in California in 1978.
It was huge.
It was a massive grassroots taxpayer revolt that successfully capped property taxes. And the movement was fueled by widespread, highly emotional stories of elderly people losing their family homes because they simply couldn't afford the skyrocketing property taxes.
So when the Laffer curve napkin story arrived, it landed in a constellation of existing, highly emotional narratives about oppressive, nonsensical taxation.
It was the right story at the exact right time.
Exactly. The napkin story just provided the perfect, visually memorable, intellectual justification for the anxiety that was already boiling over.
That is wild. It's like the perfect storm of storytelling. The economic pain was the dry brush, but the napkin story was the lightning strike.
I love that analogy.
But if false or exaggerated stories, like a debunked napkin drawing or a satirical fairy tale, can drive real-world policy and move trillions of dollars, we really have to look under the hood at the physical hardware of our brains.
The neuroscience.
Yeah. Why do our minds accept fake news so readily if it serves a good narrative? Why are we so biologically vulnerable to this?
Well, to truly understand economic narratives, we have to look to neuroscience, because the human brain is uniquely adapted for storytelling. It is literally our primary mechanism for processing reality.
Right.
The sources detail absolutely fascinating experiments conducted by a brain surgeon named Wilder Penfield in 1958.
Oh, the temporal lobe guy.
Yes, he performed surgery on awake patients using only local anesthesia for the scalp.
Because the brain tissue itself doesn't have pain receptors, right?
Exactly. So while operating, he electrically stimulated specific, narrowly focused parts of the temporal lobe to map the brain's functions.
And what did he find?
What he found was astonishing. When he touched the probe to certain areas, the patients instantly experienced highly vivid chronological stories, or they heard continuous music.
Like a hallucination.
Sort of. One patient reported hearing an orchestra playing a specific song, moving logically from verse to chorus. Another patient literally laughed out loud on the operating table and said she was suddenly having a vivid dream where a man was reassuring her about a book she was holding.
That is amazing.
Right, this wasn't a static image, it was a sequence of events, just from a tiny electrical zap.
It demonstrates that our brains literally, physically store information in narrative sequences. We are hardwired to process reality as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And because we process reality as a narrative sequence, we are highly vulnerable to stories that manipulate our emotions, completely regardless of their factual accuracy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What's fascinating here is the psychological concept of source monitoring.
Source monitoring, what is that?
Source monitoring is the cognitive process by which the brain tracks where a piece of information originally came from. It turns out human source monitoring is incredibly weak. It degrades very quickly.
Meaning, like, we remember the punchline to a joke, but a week later we completely forget who told it to us, or if they were even a reliable source of information.
Exactly. The brain prioritizes the emotional impact of a story. Over time, it remembers how the story made us feel long after it deletes the metadata of where the story came from, or whether it was later proven to be debunked.
Wow.
And this evolutionary vulnerability leads us directly to the phenomenon of kayfabe.
Kayfabe. I love this part of the
Good here.
sources.
It's so interesting.
Kayfabe is basically the accepted, institutionalized fakery in professional wrestling.
Right.
Like WWE. We all know professional wrestling is fake.
Right, everyone knows.
The audience knows the punches don't land. They know the drama is entirely scripted in a back room somewhere. But the audience completely suspends their disbelief because they desperately crave the narrative.
They want the story.
Exactly. You have the handsome, honorable hero facing off against the ugly, cowardly, cheating villain.
The audience is complicit in the fiction. They might even yell fake if a wrestler's acting is particularly bad, but they remain fully invested in the emotional arc of the match.
It's a willing participation in a lie.
Yes. And the source material actually traces this psychological desire back to ancient Rome.
Really? How far back?
Before the real, lethal, bloody gladiator combat in the Colosseum, the Romans enjoyed a practice called prelucio.
Prelucio, okay.
This was fake, theatrical combat with blunt weapons, designed purely to whet the audience's appetite and establish the narratives of the fighters. Human beings have always enjoyed pretending a compelling fiction is real, simply to stimulate their own imaginations.
That is just wild. And this combination of weak source monitoring and our deep historical love of dramatic kayfabe has massive implications for how information spreads in the modern economy.
Huge implications.
The sources cite a massive 2018 MIT study that looked at Twitter data.
This study is terrifying.
It really is. The researchers analyzed over 100,000 rumors spread by millions of people over a decade. And they found a staggering statistic.
Ooh.
False stories were retweeted 6 times faster than true stories.
6 times.
6 times faster. Why is that?
The mechanism behind that speed is that human beings are fundamentally addicted to novelty.
Right.
Truth is often complex, it is nuanced, heavily caveated, and frankly, it requires cognitive load to process.
It's work to read the truth.
Exactly. A lie, however, is not constrained by the boring bounds of reality. A false story can be perfectly engineered to be as surprising, titillating, and emotionally resonant as possible.
It hits all the right buttons.
It provides an immediate dopamine hit of novelty with very low cognitive friction.
And this ties directly into how we make financial decisions through what psychologists call the affect heuristic.
Ah, yes, the affect heuristic.
This is a mental shortcut where strong, lingering emotions like fear or anxiety bleed over and influence decisions that are completely unrelated.
Yes.
I want you, the listener, to think about the last major financial decision you made. Were you stressed about a bad day at work? Because the sources point to survey data showing that if a minor earthquake recently happened near someone's zip code, those people suddenly report believing that a massive stock market crash is much more likely to happen.
It's a complete misattribution of fear. The brain is experiencing a state of heightened anxiety, a negative emotional valence from the physical shaking of the earthquake.
Which is a very real fear.
Yes, but the brain is terrible at compartmentalizing that fear. It misattributes that ambient anxiety to the financial markets. The affect heuristic bypasses our logical risk assessment centers and relies on a more primitive brain system that is tightly connected to palpable, visceral emotions.
So if our brains are so easily hijacked by unrelated emotions, if we biologically value novelty over truth, and if a localized earthquake can make us sell off our retirement portfolio, are investors basically just participating in a massive game of pretend?
It's pretty much.
Are we all just sitting around guessing what everyone else is guessing?
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, and it is exactly the analogy the brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes made way back in 1936.
Okay.
Keynes called it the beauty contest. He noticed a popular newspaper contest of the era that printed photos of 100 faces.
Right.
But the readers weren't asked to pick the face they personally thought was objectively the prettiest. To win the prize money, they had to pick the face they thought the majority of other readers would choose as the prettiest.
So you're no longer judging the faces based on objective beauty. You are judging the crowd's judgment of the faces.
Let's take that a step further. If everyone playing the game is perfectly rational, you have to go a level deeper. You must pick the face you think others think that others think is the prettiest.
Oh my God. It becomes an infinite hall of mirrors.
Exactly. Keynes argued that this is exactly how the stock market functions. Investors aren't looking at the real underlying fundamental value of a company's factories or patents. They are looking at what they think other investors are feeling and guessing about that company's narrative. It's driven by the theory of mind. our unique cognitive ability to model the thoughts, intentions, and beliefs of others.
And the sources connect this financial phenomenon to evolutionary biology, which absolutely blew my mind.
The peacock example.
Yes. They look at Richard O. Prum's work on the evolution of the peacock's tail. The male peacock has these massive, heavy, brightly colored tail feathers.
Right.
From a purely survival standpoint, it makes no logical sense. It makes the bird slower, heavier, and much easier for a predator to catch.
It's a terrible survival trait.
Exactly. But because the female peacocks randomly decided at some arbitrary point in evolutionary history that big tails were attractive, a Fisherian runaway effect occurred.
The females select for the tail, so the males with bigger tails reproduce. Over generations, the trait becomes wildly, absurdly exaggerated simply because the crowd, in this case, the population of female peacocks, randomly decided it was valuable.
It's just arbitrary consensus.
Exactly. The asset, the tail, gained immense value purely through consensus. In economics, just like in nature, assets can gain immense bubble-like value simply because a crowd randomly decides they are valuable, driven entirely by observing what everyone else is doing.
Okay, so having established that the human brain is this inherently flawed storytelling machine, highly vulnerable to emotional, novel, and sometimes totally false stories, how do we actually identify these economic narratives in the real world before they crash the economy?
How do we spot the virus?
Yes, how do we spot the virus before it infects us? We need to know the rules of the game.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Robert Shiller's core propositions of narrative economics. Let's look at the 7 rules of the narrative economy.
Schiller outlines these propositions to help us track and understand how these narratives mutate.
Okay, hit me.
The first rule is that epidemics can be fast or slow, big or small. We have been conditioned by the internet to assume every viral narrative burns out in a week, like a trending topic on Twitter.
Right.
But some narratives take decades to reach their peak.
The example from the sources here is brilliant because it is so universal. The song Happy Birthday to You.
Oh, this is fascinating.
It actually started its life as an 1893 song called Good Morning to All. The melody was exactly the same, but the lyrics were, Good morning to you, good morning, dear children.
And it didn't really catch on.
It was a complete non-entity. It didn't spread. But someone, somewhere along the line, mutated the lyrics to Happy Birthday.
And that single tiny mutation changed everything. It allowed the song to attach itself to a recurring, universal human ritual. The birthday party.
A built-in anchor.
Exactly. By attaching to a yearly ritual involving a gathering of people, a cake, and candles, it drastically reduced the forgetting rate. It became a slow epidemic that eventually conquered the entire globe because the cultural environment provided constant, built-in repetition.
Wow. Okay, the second rule is that important narratives may comprise only a tiny percentage of the total talk.
Meaning, you don't need everyone shouting about it.
Right. You don't need everyone shouting about an economic theory on cable news for it to paralyze the economy. A quiet story can be just as deadly.
Yes.
The sources talk about Arthur Kroc, a prominent journalist who traveled across the United States in 1932, right in the bleakest depths of the Great Depression.
Well, that's a dark time.
He noted that people weren't talking about books or plays or politics. They were talking almost exclusively about survival.
Understandably.
Right. Kroc interviewed a taxi driver in Cleveland who said something chilling. He said, watch the garbage cans. See the guys who are getting their meals that way. They aren't all bums by a long shot.
That is just a terrifying, low-frequency narrative.
It really is.
It's not a loud, flashy news headline. It's a quiet, intimate story of deep desperation spreading from person to person.
And think about the economic impact of that story. If a story like that reaches you, even if you are lucky enough to still have your job, what do?
You stop spending money.
You hoard every penny of your cash because the narrative tells you that perfectly normal people might be eating from a garbage can next week. That quiet narrative paralyzed consumer spending and actively deepened the depression.
Absolutely. Moving on to Rule 3. Truth is not enough to stop false narratives.
Right, we touched on this with the Laffer curve napkin.
Yes, and the MIT Twitter study. But the historical stakes can be much, much higher than tax policy.
Oh, for sure.
The sources point to the start of World War I and a devastating military narrative called the cult of the offensive.
The cult of the offensive, what was that?
It was a widely believed military theory leading up to 1914 that the country that attacked first would possess an insurmountable decisive advantage.
Okay, so strike first, win the war.
Exactly. It was built on faulty psychology, bandwagon arguments, and macho posturing. It was a completely false narrative.
Because modern weapons favored defense, right?
Right. The reality of modern weaponry at the time meant defense actually had the massive advantage. But because the offensive narrative went viral among military leaders across Europe, it caused massive geopolitical instability.
So everyone rushed to attack.
Everyone believed they had to strike first, leading to a catastrophic arms race and eventually the horrific, stagnant slaughter of trench warfare.
Wow.
The truth was out there, but it didn't go viral fast enough to stop the false narrative from initiating a world war.
Which perfectly transitions into how these narratives create what psychologists call flashbulb memories, and how those memories dictate massive economic responses.
This goes back to our opening hook.
Exactly. Let's return to the hook we opened with. The sources contrast two major historical events, the start of World War I in 1914 and the start of World War II in 1939. In 1914, when the war broke out, European and American investors completely panicked. There were viral rumors of Russian conspiracies hoarding global gold supplies. The narrative was pure, unadulterated panic, and it caused the U.S. stock market to actually close down completely for months just to prevent a total economic collapse.
But look at 1939, when the United Kingdom declared war on Germany, officially starting World War II. The U.S. stock market did not crash.
Right. As you mentioned at the start of our deep dive, the Standard & Poor's Composite Index jumped almost 10% in a single day.
It's just wild.
Why? I mean, the human tragedy was just as horrifying, if not worse, than what was anticipated in 1914. Why was there a completely different, almost euphoric economic reaction to a world war?
Because the narrative constellation in the minds of investors had mutated over those 25 intervening years.
The stories changed.
Yes. In 1939, investors possessed a flashbulb memory of the economic outcome of the previous war. The dominant narrative on Wall Street wasn't panic. It was a story about how investors who held onto their stocks during World War I made absolute fortunes selling armaments, steel, and supplies to Europe.
Oh, wow. So the human tragedy was similar, but the economic narrative describing what a successful investor does during a war had completely flipped.
The story changed, so the market reaction changed.
And we can see the power of a leader deliberately deploying a narrative to create a new flashbulb memory in the aftermath of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks.
Right, the post-9/11 response.
The U.S. economy was already in a recession before the attacks. After the towers fell, traditional economists looked at their spreadsheets and predicted the economy would absolutely hit a brick wall.
Because fear usually paralyzes spending.
Right, the assumption was that people would be far too terrified to travel, to shop, or to spend money.
But that's not what happened. The recession ended almost immediately, becoming one of the shortest recessions in U.S. history.
It's incredible.
Because President George W. Bush and his administration actively, purposefully countered the fear narrative with a highly patriotic script.
What did he say?
He told Americans that going back to work, flying on commercial planes, and literally going down to Disney World in Florida was a way to stand up against terror.
Wow. Framing shopping as patriotism.
Exactly. He framed everyday consumer spending and vacation travel as profound acts of national defiance and courage. It was a narrative perfectly engineered to override the effect heuristic of fear, and it worked flawlessly.
So what does this all mean? I have to challenge you here.
Let's do it.
We've established that the economy is driven by stories, not math. But if a narrative can mutate like a virus, if a minor earthquake can crash a stock portfolio, and if a presidential speech about Disney World can single-handedly end a recession, does that mean economic forecasting is essentially useless?
That's a fair question.
Are economists just pretending? Are we all just trying to predict next year's hit movie? The sources literally quote the famous screenwriter William Goldman, who said of Hollywood, "Nobody knows anything about what will be a box office hit." Are we in the same boat with our life savings?
It is incredibly difficult, and traditional economists who only look at spreadsheets often fail miserably to predict these shifts precisely because they ignore the stories.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we are flying blind. We aren't helpless.
Okay, good.
By tracking the contagion curves of words and ideas using modern tools like Google Ngrams, which tracks the frequency of words in published books, or ProQuest newspaper archives, we can actually see the wave forming before it crashes onto the shore.
So we can measure the narrative.
Yes. We can identify the exact moment when a mild story about labor-saving machinery morphs into a viral panic story about AI replacing all human jobs. We can watch the mathematical trajectory of a narrative epidemic and prepare for the massive economic behavioral shifts that will inevitably follow.
And we are living through the most dramatic, accelerated examples of this right now. The 2020 preface to the source material looks at how modern events, amplified by the internet, instantly generate global narrative pandemics.
Oh, absolutely.
For example, the horrific, visceral video of George Floyd's murder didn't just stay local. It generated a massive narrative of righteous protest and a demand for deep institutional change that spread globally in a matter of days.
Shifting corporate policies and economic priorities worldwide almost overnight.
Exactly.
And similarly, the COVID-19 pandemic generated swarms of conflicting, highly viral narratives.
Forms is the right word for it.
You had the fear of the invisible disease itself. You had anger directed at authorities. You had narratives comparing it to the 1918 flu and massive heated debates over the efficacy of masks and lockdowns.
Right.
These narratives, more than the biological virus itself, dictated how populations responded, whether they went to work and how they spent their money.
And that narrative swarm directly resulted in the sharpest, most sudden world economic recession in recorded history.
Exactly. The fundamental mechanism, the way a story spreads and alters human behavior, is exactly the same today as it was for the 1861 Civil War sergeant receiving his orders, or the 1929 shoeshine boy giving out hot stock tips right before the Great Crash.
The internet just made the virus faster.
Exactly.
It's all connected. The economy isn't a machine made of gears and spreadsheets. It's a campfire.
I love that. A campfire.
Yeah. And the stories we tell around it, whether it's the modern myth of a mysterious hacker inventing digital gold, a debunked drawing on a restaurant napkin, or the existential, primal dread of a robot taking away our livelihood, those stories dictate whether we open our wallets in optimism or hoard our cash in fear.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. It is a call to action, to interrogate the stories driving your own financial life.
Pay attention to the narratives.
The next time you decide to buy a stock or hold off on buying a house or change your career path, you need to pause and ask yourself, are you acting on fundamental, rational data? Or did you just fall under the spell of a beautifully crafted, highly contagious narrative?
Are you acting on the math, or are you acting on the story?
Exactly.
That is the perfect question to leave on. But I want to give you one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've spent this deep dive analyzing how massive historic narratives mutated and caused global economic shifts.
Right.
Right now, at this exact second, in some obscure corner of the internet, on a niche message board, or buried in a social media feed, a seemingly innocent meme, a joke, or a minor local news story is quietly mutating.
It's out there.
It hasn't hit the mainstream yet. It looks harmless. But it has the exact right emotional hook, the perfect visual anchor to become the next global economic crisis or the next massive financial bubble. What story are you ignoring today that will control your bank account tomorrow?
That's a chilling thought.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.